He looked at me like I was dirt beneath his expensive Italian shoes. His eyes, cold as winter storms over the Mediterranean, traced the curves of my dark skin with something that resembled disgust. And then he said the words that shattered whatever naive hope I had left in my chest. "You will never be anything more than a transaction to me. A debt paid. A stain on my bloodline that I am forced to endure." I stood there in my wedding dress, white silk against brown skin, trembling not from fear, but from the magnitude of the hatred radiating from the man who had just become my husband. Dax Valentini, the most powerful mafia boss on the eastern seaboard, a man who could have anyone and anything he desired with a snap of his fingers. And he despised me with every fiber of his being. But here is what Dax did not know. Here is what no one in that room filled with criminal royalty understood as they watched this twisted union unfold. That same hatred burning in his eyes, I would one day watch it transform into something that would bring the great Dax Valentini to his knees. I would watch this man who thought I was nothing more than a stain learn the true meaning of devotion. And it would all begin on one single night that neither of us saw coming. But first, let me tell you how a girl from the South Side ended up married to the devil himself. Because this story is not just about hate transforming into love. This is about power, sacrifice, and the moment when a man realizes he has been fighting against the very person who was destined to save his life. Tell me where you are watching from right now. Drop your location in the comments, because I need to know where all my beautiful people are tuning in from today. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button immediately, because this story is going to take you on a journey you will never forget. Trust me when I say you do not want to miss a single moment of what is about to unfold. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Bridget Okonkwo. My mother, God rest her soul, named me after the west wind, because she said I came into this world like a gentle breeze, but carried the force of a hurricane within me. Everyone called me Zephyr. I was 23 years old when my life was traded away like currency on a bargaining table. My father, Adebayo Okonkwo, was a proud man, a man who had built his import business from nothing, who had come to this country with $17 in his pocket and dreams as vast as the Nigerian plains he had left behind. He taught me that dignity was not something anyone could take from you, unless you handed it over willingly. He taught me to stand tall, even when the world tried to make me small. But my father made one terrible mistake. He trusted the wrong people. The Valentini family had approached him 3 years before my wedding day. They needed legitimate businesses to funnel their money through, and my father's shipping company was the perfect cover. At first, it was simple. Containers that were never inspected. Shipments that disappeared from manifests. My father told himself it was harmless. He told himself he was just looking the other way. He was wrong. The deeper he got, the more they owned him. And when a rival family intercepted a shipment worth $40 million, a shipment that was supposed to be under my father's protection, the Valentinis came calling for payment. My father did not have $40 million. He did not have $4 million. The business that looked prosperous on the outside was drowning in debt on the inside, kept afloat only by the Valentini money that now demanded repayment. Salvatore Valentini, Dax's father, was an old man who believed in old ways. He could have killed my father. He could have taken everything we owned and left our bodies in shallow graves. Instead, he saw an opportunity. "Your daughter," Salvatore said, sitting across from my father in our small living room like he owned the space. "I have seen her. She is educated. She is beautiful in an exotic way. My son needs to settle down, and a wife from outside our world might be useful. Fresh blood. Someone with no ties to rival families. Someone who can be controlled. My father wept. I had never seen him cry before, not even when my mother passed from cancer when I was 15. But that night, after Salvatore left with an agreement that bound my life to a stranger's, my father wept until there were no tears left. "Forgive me," he whispered, unable to meet my eyes. "Forgive me, my daughter. I have failed you." I should have run. I should have disappeared into the night and never looked back. But I knew what would happen if I did. The Valentinis would kill my father. They would kill my younger brother, Kosi Sochukwu, who was only 16 and had dreams of becoming a doctor. They would erase my entire family from existence. So I chose to stay. I chose sacrifice. I chose to walk into the lion's den with my head held high and my mother's strength wrapped around me like armor. The wedding was a spectacle of wealth and power. 500 guests gathered in a cathedral that looked like it belonged in Rome rather than upstate New York. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume, and something darker, something that whispered of violence, barely contained beneath civilized surfaces. I walked down the aisle alone. My father could not bear to give me away, so he sat in the front pew with his head bowed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My brother Kosi sat beside him, his young face hard with fury he was too powerless to act upon. And at the altar stood Dax Valentini. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved by Renaissance masters. His jaw was sharp, his nose strong, and his lips held a cruel curve that suggested he found the world perpetually amusing in its weakness. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Dark as midnight, cold as the grave, and filled with absolute contempt as he watched me approach. I later learned that Dax had fought against this marriage with everything he had. He had screamed at his father, threatened to abandon the family, even aimed a gun at his own reflection in rage. Dax Valentini had plans for his life, and none of them included a black woman from the South Side as his wife. He saw me as an insult, a punishment, a reminder of his father's control over every aspect of his existence. And because he could not direct his fury at Salvatore, he directed it all at me. Do you, Dax Alessandro Valentini, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The pause that followed stretched into eternity. I watched his jaw clench, watched his hands form fists at his sides, watched the war between duty and hatred play out across his beautiful, terrible face. I do. The words came out like he was spitting poison. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly. I spoke with strength. I looked directly into those midnight eyes and refused to let him see me tremble. I do. And just like that, I became Bridget Valentini, a lamb married to a wolf, a transaction in a white dress. The reception was a blur of faces I did not know and congratulations I did not believe. Dax stayed as far from me as possible, surrounded by men in expensive suits who looked at me with curiosity, amusement, or thinly veiled hostility. The women were worse. The wives and daughters of made men studied me like scientists examining an unusual specimen, whispering behind their hands, their laughter sharp as knives. One woman approached me directly. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and diamonds dripping from her ears and throat. Her face was beautiful but cold, and I recognized Dax's eyes in her own. "So you are the one," she said, circling me slowly. "The African girl who has been forced upon my son." "Nigerian-American," I corrected, my voice steady. "And I believe forced is a term that applies to both of us." Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, that I had dared to respond with anything other than subservience. This was Celestina Valentini, Dax's mother, and she ruled the women of this world with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. "You have a spine," she observed. "Good. You will need it. My son is not a kind man, and he has no intention of making your life anything other than miserable. I suggest you learn your place quickly and stay invisible. It is the only way you will survive this family." She walked away without waiting for my response, leaving me standing alone in a sea of strangers who all wished I did not exist. That night, in the penthouse that was now supposedly my home, Dax made his position clear. "There is a room at the end of the East Hall," he said, not looking at me as he poured himself a whiskey. "That is where you will stay. You do not enter my bedroom. You do not touch my things. You do not speak to me unless absolutely necessary. You are here because my father commanded it, and I will tolerate your presence for as long as I must. But do not mistake this arrangement for anything other than what it is." "And what is it?" I asked. He turned then, and the hatred in his eyes nearly drove me back a step. "A prison sentence. For both of us." He walked away, disappearing into the depths of the penthouse, and I was left standing in the foyer of my gilded cage, wondering how I would survive the days and months and years ahead. But I was Bridget Okonkwo before I was Bridget Valentini. I was the daughter of a woman who had survived war and famine and displacement. I was the granddaughter of warriors and queens, and no man, not even a Mafia king, would break what my ancestors had forged. I would survive this, and somehow, some way, I would find my freedom. I just did not know yet that freedom would come in a form I never expected. I did not know that the man who hated me would one day love me more than his own life. And I certainly did not know about the night that would change everything between us forever. But that night was coming, and when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The first 6 months of my marriage were an exercise in invisibility. I learned to move through the penthouse like a ghost, existing in the shadows while Dax conducted his business and lived his life as though I did not exist. We spoke perhaps a dozen words to each other in that entire time, and each word was laced with ice. I spent my days reading in the library that Dax never used, a massive room filled with leather-bound books that smelled of age and forgotten stories. I found solace in those pages, traveling to worlds where I was not a prisoner, where my skin was not a source of shame, where love was possible and real and beautiful. I also spent time with the only person in the Valentini household who showed me any kindness, Mireille, the elderly Haitian woman who managed the domestic staff. She had worked for the Valentinis for 30 years, and she saw everything while pretending to see nothing. "You watch him," she said to me one afternoon, her accent thick and warm as she prepared afternoon tea. "When he does not know you are looking, you watch him." "I don't know what you mean," I replied, though we both knew I was lying. Mireille laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Child, I have eyes older than wisdom. I see how you study him when he walks through the room. I see how you notice the weight he carries on those shoulders. You are curious about the monster you have married." I was silent for a moment, considering her words. She was right. Despite everything, despite the hatred and the cruelty and the cold emptiness of my existence, I found myself watching Dax when he did not know I was there. And what I saw confused me. In public, Dax was exactly what he appeared to be: cold, ruthless, commanding. Men twice his age deferred to him with fear in their eyes. His word was law, and those who questioned it often disappeared without a trace. He was 31 years old and had already built a criminal empire that exceeded even his father's accomplishments. But in private, when he thought no one was watching, I saw glimpses of something else. I saw him standing at the window at 3 a.m, staring out at the city with an expression that looked almost like loneliness. I saw him flinch when his father's name was mentioned, a micro-expression of pain that vanished almost before it appeared. I saw him reading letters that he kept locked in his desk, letters that made his hands tremble and his jaw tighten against emotions he refused to release. Dax Valentini was not just a monster. He was a man haunted by something, broken by something, and hiding that brokenness beneath layers of ice and fury. It did not make me hate him any less, but it made me curious. The first time Dax truly looked at me was 3 months into our marriage, and it was because of an accident. I had been walking through the East Wing corridor, carrying a stack of books from the library, when I rounded a corner and collided directly with him. The books went flying, and I stumbled backward, losing my balance entirely. I would have fallen hard against the marble floor if his hand had not shot out and caught my arm. For a moment, we were frozen. His grip was strong, but not painful. His fingers wrapped around my upper arm with a steadiness that surprised me. Our faces were close enough that I could see the flecks of gold hidden in his dark eyes, close enough to smell his cologne, sandalwood, and something darker that made my heart race despite my better judgment. "You should watch where you're going," he said, but his voice lacked its usual venom. "I was watching," I replied, finding my footing and stepping back from his touch. "You came around the corner too quickly." He stared at me, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that I had not cowered or apologized profusely. I was learning that the people in Dax's world treated him like a god to be worshipped and feared. No one spoke back. No one challenged. No one dared. But I was not one of his people. I was his prisoner, yes, but I was also Adebayo and Chidinma's daughter, and my parents had not raised me to bow before any man. "You have a sharp tongue," Dax observed. "I have a brain that works," I corrected. "The tongue simply reports what it discovers." His lips twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one I had ever seen on his face. Then he seemed to catch himself, and the ice returned. "Stay out of my way," he said, and walked past me without another word. But that night, for the first time, I saw him watching me during dinner. We ate at opposite ends of a table long enough to seat 20, surrounded by staff who moved silently and efficiently. I felt his eyes on me throughout the meal, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I did not look back. I refused to give him the satisfaction. But something had shifted. I did not know what it meant, and I was too afraid to hope it meant anything at all. The months continued to pass. Winter melted into spring, and spring bloomed into summer. I established a routine that kept me sane. Morning walks in the garden that surrounded the penthouse terrace, afternoons in the library, evenings practicing the piano I had discovered in a room that seemed designed for guests who never came. I was not allowed to leave the penthouse without permission, a restriction that chafed against my soul. But I was permitted to communicate with my family, and I called my father every Sunday without fail. "Are you well?" he would ask, his voice heavy with guilt that would never ease. "I am surviving," I would answer, because lying would have served neither of us. My brother Kosi called me separately, his conversations filled with rage and plans for rescue that I always talked him out of. "I'm going to get you out of there," he promised every time. "I'm going to become powerful enough to destroy them all and bring you home." "You're going to become a doctor," I reminded him. "You're going to heal people and save lives and make Mama proud. That is how you help me, Kosi, by living the life I cannot." He would cry then, my fierce little brother, and I would hold the phone and wish I could reach through it to hold him instead. Dax's hatred remained constant, but it evolved in ways I did not immediately understand. He still treated me with coldness, still spoke to me only when necessary, still looked at me like I was something to be endured rather than embraced. But the edge of cruelty began to soften. He stopped making comments about my skin, my heritage, my presence as a stain on his bloodline. He began nodding acknowledgement when we passed in the halls, rather than looking through me like I was invisible. Once, I even caught him listening outside the door while I played piano, his expression unreadable before he disappeared into the shadows. I did not understand what was happening. I did not understand why the wall between us seemed to be developing cracks. And then I met the woman who had built that wall in the first place. Her name was Evangelina Rossetti, and she arrived at the penthouse on a summer afternoon that shimmered with heat and hidden violence. She was stunning in that untouchable way that certain women cultivate like weapons. Tall and slender, with auburn hair that fell in waves to her waist, and eyes the color of sea glass. Her clothes probably cost more than my father's monthly mortgage, and she moved through the world like it was designed specifically for her pleasure. Dax's reaction to her presence told me everything I needed to know. "Eva." His voice softened in a way I had never heard before. His eyes warmed. His entire body language shifted from predator to something almost gentle. "Dax." She kissed both his cheeks in the European fashion, lingering longer than necessary. "I've missed you desperately. It's been too long since we were together." I stood in the doorway of the library, forgotten as always, watching this reunion unfold. The pain that lanced through my chest surprised me. I had no right to feel jealous. Dax was my husband in name only, a man who had made clear that I was nothing to him. Why should I care if another woman made him smile in ways I never could? But I cared. God help me, I cared. Eva noticed me then, her sea glass eyes sweeping over me with the kind of assessment one gives to furniture. "So, this is the charity case," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "I must say, Dax, your father has a twisted sense of humor, though I suppose she's pretty enough, in an ethnic sort of way." I felt my spine stiffen, felt the anger that my mother had always warned me to control, rising like lava in my veins. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice deceptively calm. "I didn't catch your name. I'm Bridget, Dax's wife." The emphasis on wife was not lost on anyone in the room. Eva's smile sharpened. "Evangelina Rossetti, Dax's first love. We were engaged before his father decided to play games with all our lives. We would have been married by now, if not for circumstances beyond our control." She glanced at me when she said circumstances, making clear exactly what she meant. I looked at Dax, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he remained silent, his expression unreadable, offering me no defense whatsoever. "Well," I said, my heart cracking even as my voice remained steady. "I suppose I'll leave you two to catch up. Please excuse me." I walked away with my head held high, my shoulders straight, my dignity intact. But the moment I reached my room, I allowed myself to sink onto the bed and wonder why I had ever expected anything different. Dax had not just been hateful toward me because of his father's control. He had been in love with someone else, someone who looked like the women in his world, someone who matched, someone who belonged. I was nothing but an obstacle to the life he had wanted. That night, I cried for the first time since my wedding day. I cried for the girl who had once believed in fairy tales, and the woman who now knew that some cages were made of gold, but were still prisons. I cried for the love I would never have, and the life I would never live. And somewhere in the penthouse, I heard the sound of Evangelina's laughter echoing through the halls, a reminder of everything I was not, and everything I could never be. But here's the thing about the darkest moments of our lives. They are often the precursor to the light. We cannot know when we are trapped in shadow that dawn is approaching. We cannot see the transformation that is already beginning, the forces that are aligning to change everything we think we understand. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone made you feel invisible, worthless, like you did not deserve to be seen? What did you do? Did you shrink? Or did you find your fire? Let me know in the comments below, because I truly want to know your story too. Now let me continue, because what happened next changed the entire trajectory of my life with Dax Valentini. Evangelina stayed for 2 weeks that felt like 2 years. She draped herself across Dax's life like silk, accompanying him to dinners I was not invited to, appearing at breakfasts where I sat ignored, filling the penthouse with the sound of her voice and her perfume and her possessive laughter. I retreated further into myself. I stopped playing piano because I did not want anyone to hear me. I stopped walking in the gardens because I did not want to risk encounters that would leave me feeling small. I became the ghost I had tried so hard not to be, haunting the edges of my own existence. But Mireille noticed. Mireille always noticed. "You are letting her win," the old woman said to me one morning, finding me curled in a window seat with a book I was not really reading. "You are letting that poisonous creature steal what little light you have left." "I don't have anything worth stealing," I replied. Mireille made a sound of disgust. "Child, you have everything worth stealing. You have your spirit, your strength, your fire. You have survived months in this house when lesser women would have crumbled, and now you let some jealous viper reduce you to shadows?" "She's not jealous of me. She has Dax. She has everything." "She has his attention," Mireille corrected. "That is not the same as having his heart. And she does not have you. Your beauty, your intelligence, your dignity. She sees these things, and they torment her because she cannot compete with what she does not understand." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I was anything other than what Dax saw. A mistake, a burden, a stain. But belief is hard to hold on to when you are drowning. The turning point came unexpectedly, as turning points often do. It was a Thursday evening, and Dax was hosting a dinner for several important business associates. Evangelina, of course, was acting as hostess, a role that should have been mine, but that I had never been invited to fill. I stayed in my room, as I always did during these events, reading and trying not to listen to the sounds of life happening without me. But then there was a knock at my door, and when I opened it, I found Salvatore Valentini standing in the hallway. I had seen Dax's father only a handful of times since the wedding. He was a large man, physically and in presence, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He commanded the kind of respect that came from decades of accumulated power, and even his son deferred to him in ways that suggested old wounds and older fears. "Daughter-in-law," Salvatore said, his voice a deep rumble. "You are needed downstairs." I don't understand." "There is a dinner. You are Dax's wife. You should be present." "Dax has made clear that he does not want me at these events." Salvatore's eyes hardened. "I do not care what Dax wants. You are a Valentini now, and you will act like one. Get dressed appropriately and come downstairs in 20 minutes. He walked away without waiting for my agreement, and I was left with a choice that was not really a choice at all. I dressed quickly, selecting a gown that Celestina had provided when I first arrived, a deep burgundy silk that draped elegantly and offset my skin in ways that even I had to admit were beautiful. I applied makeup with hands that trembled slightly, and arranged my hair in an updo that made my neck look longer and more graceful. When I walked into the dining room, every head turned. Evangelina's expression was priceless. Her sea-glass eyes widened with shock and then narrowed with pure hatred. She had clearly not expected me to appear, and my presence disrupted whatever narrative she had been spinning. But it was Dax's reaction that stopped my breath. He stared at me as though he had never seen me before. His dark eyes traveled from my face down to the gown and back up again, and something in his expression shifted in a way I could not define. It was not quite warmth. It was not quite desire. But it was not the usual cold contempt either. "Ah, there she is," Salvatore said, gesturing for me to take the empty seat across from Evangelina. "My daughter-in-law, Bridget. Forgive her tardiness. She was attending to household matters." I sat down, acutely aware of every eye upon me. The men at the table looked at me with obvious interest, their gazes appraising in that way that made me want to cover myself. Their wives looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been solidarity. "So you're the African queen," one of the men said, a heavy-set individual with a thick New Jersey accent. "Dax, you never mentioned your wife was so lovely." "Nigerian-American," I corrected gently, the second time I had had to make this distinction. "And yes, my husband tends to keep me as his little secret." There was a moment of surprised silence, and then several people laughed. The atmosphere shifted subtly, becoming more relaxed, more open. "She has wit," the man said, nodding approvingly. "I like that. A beautiful woman with a brain is a rare thing indeed." "I assure you, it is not as rare as men would like to believe," I replied. "We simply learn early on to pretend otherwise." More laughter. I was finding my footing, discovering that these people, for all their power and danger, were still people who appreciated confidence and cleverness. Throughout the dinner, I held my own. I discussed art with a collector from Milan, debated politics with a diplomat whose official position was clearly a cover for something else, and charmed an elderly woman who turned out to be the grandmother of one of the most feared hitmen on the East Coast. Evangelina watched all of this with barely concealed fury. She tried several times to steer the conversation back to herself, to highlight her connection to Dax, to remind everyone that she was the one who truly belonged in this world. But somehow, inexplicably, the attention kept returning to me. And Dax watched it all in silence, his dark eyes following me throughout the evening with an intensity that made my skin flush. When the dinner ended and the guests began to depart, I excused myself to return to my room. But I had barely made it to the hallway when a hand caught my arm. Dax. That was unexpected, he said, his voice low. Your father commanded my presence. I was merely obeying. You were not merely anything. You were remarkable. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. I'm sorry? Those people tonight, they represent billions of dollars and centuries of influence. They are not easily impressed. But you impressed them. You made them see something that I have been too blind to notice. And what is that? He was silent for a long moment, his hand still warm against my arm, his eyes searching my face as though looking for something he had lost. That I may have made a terrible mistake, he finally said. Then he released me and walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway with my heart pounding and my mind reeling with possibilities I was too afraid to name. That night, I lay awake for hours, replaying those words over and over again. A terrible mistake. What did it mean? Was he finally seeing me as something other than a burden? Was the wall between us truly beginning to crumble? I did not know the answers, but for the first time since my wedding day, I allowed myself to hope. The weeks that followed the dinner brought subtle but undeniable changes. Dax began acknowledging me more openly. He would greet me in the mornings, ask about my reading, even occasionally join me in the library for conversations that started awkward, but gradually became almost comfortable. The ice in his eyes began to thaw, degree by degree, and I saw more of those glimpses I had noticed before. The loneliness, the pain, the man hidden beneath the monster. Evangelina, of course, noticed these changes. Her visits became more frequent, her attempts to claim Dax's attention more desperate. She escalated her campaign against me, making cutting comments about my hair, my clothes, my background, anything she could use to remind Dax that I did not belong. But something remarkable was happening. The more she attacked, the more Dax seemed to defend me. Not openly, not dramatically, but in small ways that spoke volumes. He would change the subject when she criticized me. He would leave the room when her comments became particularly cruel. Once, I even heard him say, "Enough, Eva," in a tone that brooked no argument. It was not love. I was not foolish enough to call it that. But it was something. A foundation being built, brick by brick. A connection forming despite every obstacle thrown in its path. And then everything shattered in a single night. The night that would change everything. It began with blood. I woke to the sound of commotion, shouts echoing through the penthouse in the early hours of morning. I grabbed my robe and hurried into the hallway to find chaos unfolding. Dax was being carried in by two of his men, and even in the dim light, I could see that his shirt was soaked crimson. His face was pale as death, his eyes closed, his body limp in their arms. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing toward them. "Ambush," one of the men gasped. "The Rossellini family. They hit us at the warehouse. Dax took 2 bullets, one in the shoulder, one in the stomach." My heart stopped. Stomach wounds were serious, often fatal if not treated immediately. "Has a doctor been called?" "Dr. Moretti is on his way, but traffic. There was an accident on the bridge. It could be 30 minutes or more." 30 minutes. A man could bleed out in 30 minutes. A man could die. "Get him to his bedroom," I commanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now." They obeyed without question, perhaps surprised by the authority in my tone, but too panicked to challenge it. I followed them, my mind racing through memories I had tried to forget. What no one in the Valentini household knew was that before my father's business had consumed his life, he had wanted me to become a doctor. I had spent 2 years in pre-med before circumstances forced me to drop out. 2 years of anatomy, of emergency medicine, of learning how to keep people alive when every second counted. It was not a complete education. It was not enough to perform surgery or handle true emergencies. But it was something. And something was all we had. In Dax's bedroom, I barked orders like I had been commanding these men my entire life. I needed clean towels, hot water, the first aid kit, any medical supplies they could find. They scrambled to obey, while I knelt beside the bed and assessed the damage. The shoulder wound was bloody, but relatively clean, the bullet having passed through without hitting bone or major arteries. It was the stomach wound that terrified me. The bullet was still inside, and blood was pooling at an alarming rate. "We need to stop the bleeding," I said, applying pressure with folded towels while my mind raced through options. "Hold these here. Do not let go." One of the men took over the pressure, while I searched through the medical supplies that had been brought. There was not much, but there was enough. Gauze, antiseptic, surgical tape, and thank God, a suture kit that had probably never been used. I worked quickly, my hands steady even as my heart raced. I cleaned the wounds, packed the stomach wound with gauze to slow the bleeding, sutured the shoulder wound closed with stitches that my professors would have praised. Through it all, Dax remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but present. By the time Dr. Moretti arrived, the worst of the crisis had passed. He took over immediately, examining my work with an expression that shifted from skepticism to surprise to grudging respect. "You did this?" he asked. "I did what was necessary." "You saved his life. Another 20 minutes and he would have bled out. Who are you?" "His wife," I said, and for the first time, the word felt true. Dr. Moretti worked through the night, removing the bullet from Dax's stomach, cleaning and properly closing the wounds, starting IV fluids and antibiotics. I stayed in the room throughout, unwilling to leave, unable to explain even to myself why his survival had become the only thing that mattered. When the doctor finally declared Dax stable and left to get some rest, I was alone with my husband for the first time in our marriage. I sat in a chair beside his bed, watching his chest rise and fall, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. He looked different in sleep, younger somehow, the harshness of his features softened by vulnerability. I could see the ghost of the boy he must have been before this world shaped him into a weapon. "You hate me," I whispered to his unconscious form. "You have made my life miserable for months. I should have let you bleed. I should have walked away and let fate take its course." I reached out and touched his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against my own. But I couldn't. I don't know why, but I couldn't. Maybe I'm a fool. Maybe I'm weak. Or maybe... I paused, afraid to speak the words even when no one could hear. Maybe I'm starting to feel something I have no right to feel. I fell asleep in that chair, my hand still holding his. And when I woke in the morning light, his eyes were open and fixed on my face. "You stayed," he said, his voice hoarse and weak. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die. You're the only thing standing between my family and destruction." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Is that the only reason?" I looked at him, at this man who had made me feel worthless for so long, and I told him the truth. No, it's not the only reason. Something changed in his expression then. The ice cracked, fell away, and beneath it I saw something I had never seen before. Gratitude, confusion, and something that looked almost like wonder. "You saved my life," he said. "The doctor told me what you did. He said you kept me alive when anyone else would have just watched me die." "I told you. I had my reasons." "Tell me the real ones." I was silent for a long moment, weighing how much truth I could afford to share. "Because you're a human being," I finally said. "Because whatever you think of me, whatever you've done to make me feel small and worthless, you are still a person with a life that matters. And I could not live with myself if I let you die when I had the power to prevent it." Dax stared at me as though I had spoken in a language he did not understand. Perhaps I had. In his world, people killed each other for power, for money, for insult. The concept of saving someone simply because it was the right thing to do was probably foreign beyond comprehension. "I have been cruel to you," he said. "Yes. I have treated you like something to be despised." "Yes. And yet you saved me." "Yes." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet with something I had never expected to see. Tears. "I don't deserve it," he whispered. "I don't deserve you." "No," I agreed. "You don't. But life isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. And last night, I chose to save you. What you do with that choice is up to you." I stood up, preparing to leave, but his hand caught mine with surprising strength. "Stay," he said. "Please. I need to tell you something. I need you to understand why I've been the way I've been." I hesitated, then sat back down. And Dax Valentini, the most feared man in the criminal underworld, began to tell me his story. He spoke for hours, his voice breaking and recovering, as he revealed pieces of himself that I suspected he had never shared with anyone. He told me about his childhood, about a father who ruled their home with the same iron fist he used to rule his empire. Salvatore Valentini did not believe in softness, in affection, in the gentle nurturing that shapes healthy men. He believed in strength, in dominance, in teaching his son that love was weakness and vulnerability was death. Every time I showed emotion, every time I let myself feel anything, he would punish me, Dax said. Not with his hands, with his words. He would tell me I was weak, pathetic, a disgrace to the Valentini name. He would isolate me for days, make me sleep in the basement until I learned to lock everything away. He told me about his mother, Celestina, who had once been warm and loving, but who had been systematically broken by her husband, until she became the cold statue I had encountered. He had watched his mother's light extinguish, year by year, and he had learned that to love was to watch the person you loved be destroyed. He told me about Evangelina, the woman he had been engaged to before me. Their relationship had been arranged by their families when they were children, but Dax had allowed himself to believe it was real. He had invested his carefully guarded emotions in her, had trusted her with parts of himself he showed no one else. And then he discovered that she had been unfaithful, not once, but repeatedly, with multiple men, including one of his own soldiers. She had laughed about it to her friends, mocking his devotion, calling him a fool for believing she could ever love him. I was going to marry her anyway, Dax said, his voice bitter. That's how broken I was. I was going to accept the humiliation because I didn't believe anyone could love me for real. And then my father announced this arrangement with your father, and suddenly I had a new target for all my rage. He looked at me with eyes full of shame. You didn't deserve any of it. You were innocent, a victim of circumstances, just like me. But I was so consumed by my own pain that I couldn't see yours. I made you the enemy because it was easier than acknowledging that the real enemy was my own fear. Fear of what? I asked. Fear of feeling. Fear of letting anyone close enough to hurt me again if I kept you at a distance. If I convinced myself that you were beneath me, then I never had to risk anything. I never had to be vulnerable. He reached up and touched my face, his fingers gentle against my cheek. But last night, you did something no one has ever done for me. You saw past the monster and found the man underneath. You saved me not because of what I could give you, but simply because you believed my life had value. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Do you understand how it has shattered everything I thought I knew? I felt tears forming in my own eyes. Dax, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to love me. I know I haven't earned that right. But I am asking you to let me try. Let me show you who I can be when I'm not ruled by fear and hatred. Let me learn how to be the kind of man who deserves a woman like you. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. And despite everything, despite the months of cruelty and the walls I had built around my own heart, I found myself wanting to believe him. I can't promise anything, I said. You've hurt me deeply, Dax. The things you said, the way you made me feel, those wounds don't heal overnight. I know. It will take time, possibly a lot of time. I have nothing but time. I'll spend every day of the rest of my life proving to you that I can change, that I can be worthy of the gift you gave me last night. I looked at him, at the tears on his cheeks, at the raw hope in his eyes, and I made a decision. Then start now, I said. Start by seeing me, really seeing me, not as a transaction, not as a stain on your bloodline, but as a person, as your wife. I see you, Bridget, he said, and for the first time, he spoke my name like it was something precious. I see you, and you are the most beautiful thing I have ever known. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Dax recovered from his wounds slowly, and during his convalescence, I became his primary companion. We talked for hours every day, sharing stories from our childhoods, debating philosophy and politics, discovering that we had far more in common than either of us had ever suspected. He was brilliant in ways I had not expected, with a mind that could analyze complex problems and a curiosity about the world that years of criminal violence had not managed to crush. He asked me about Nigeria, about my heritage, about the traditions and stories that had shaped me. He listened with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and began to see my culture not as something foreign or inferior, but as something rich and valuable. I, in turn, learned about his world, not the violence and the darkness, but the history, the codes of honor that existed alongside the brutality, the complex web of loyalty and obligation that governed everything. I began to understand how a person could be shaped by such an environment, how good intentions could be twisted and corrupted until the original self was buried beneath layers of survival adaptation. When Evangelina returned, expecting to find the same dynamic she had always exploited, she found something entirely different. Dax and I were in the library together when she arrived, sitting close on the same sofa, his hand resting casually on mine as we discussed a book we had both been reading. We looked up at her entrance, and I watched her face as she registered what she was seeing. Understanding, fury, fear. "Dax," she said, her voice sharp with barely controlled emotion. "What is this?" "This is my wife," Dax replied calmly, "and we are having a private conversation. If you need something, you can speak with the staff." Evangelina's face flushed red. "You cannot be serious. After everything we've been to each other, you're choosing her?" "I am choosing myself," Dax said. "I am choosing to be a man I can respect, married to a woman I am learning to respect. Whatever we had, Eva, it was built on lies and pretenses. I am done with pretenses. Your father will never accept this. The families will talk. You are destroying everything for some nobody." I felt Dax's hand tighten around mine, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerous. "That nobody saved my life when I was bleeding out on a warehouse floor. That nobody has more courage, more dignity, and more grace than you could ever hope to possess. And if I ever hear you speak about her that way again, you will discover exactly how far my protection extends." Evangelina stared at him for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. We never saw her again. The transformation in our marriage was not immediate or complete. There were still difficult days, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves and we had to consciously choose to fight for what we were building. Dax's world was still dangerous, still dark, still filled with violence that I struggled to accept. But we were learning. We were growing. And slowly, day by day, I began to believe that this man who had once hated me was falling in love with me instead. And I was falling in love with him too. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Dax took me to meet his father. Salvatore Valentini had watched our transformation with skepticism that gradually shifted to something resembling grudging acceptance. He had received reports of his son's changed behavior, of the renewed focus and determination that Dax brought to his work, of the stability that had replaced the reckless edge that had worried his lieutenants. "She has been good for you," Salvatore acknowledged when we entered his study. "I will give her that much." "She has been everything for me," Dax replied, his arm around my waist. "And I am here to tell you that I am stepping back from the day-to-day operations of the business." Salvatore's eyes widened. "What?" "I want to build something different, something legitimate. Bridget has convinced me that there is another way to have power and influence, a way that doesn't require blood on my hands. I will remain part of the family, but I will no longer lead the operations." The argument that followed was explosive. Years of tension and resentment erupting between father and son. But Dax stood firm, and eventually, Salvatore was forced to accept what he could not change. We left that night with our freedom. In the years that followed, Dax and I built a life together that neither of us had ever imagined possible. We moved away from the penthouse, away from the shadows, and created a home filled with light and love and the sound of children's laughter. Yes, children. Our daughter, Chidinma, was born 2 years after that transformative night, named for my mother, who had never lived to see her granddaughter. Our son, Alessandro, came 2 years after that, a serious child with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn spirit. My father lived to see both of them born, his guilt finally easing as he watched his grandchildren play in our garden, and understood that somehow, impossibly, his mistake had led to something beautiful. Kosi became a doctor, just as I had always known he would. He specialized in trauma surgery, and he often credited his sister's impossible marriage for teaching him that the most unlikely situations could produce the most miraculous outcomes. Dax became a legitimate businessman, using his intelligence and his connections to build an empire that operated entirely within the law. It was not always easy, and there were moments when the old darkness called to him. But he had made a choice, and he honored it every single day. And I became what I had always been meant to be, a woman who stood in her power, who refused to be diminished, who transformed hatred into love through the simple act of being unapologetically herself. Standing on the terrace of our home on a summer evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I felt Dax's arms wrap around me from behind. "Tell me what you're thinking," he murmured against my ear. "I'm thinking about that first night in the penthouse," I said, "when you told me I was nothing but a prison sentence." His arms tightened. "I was a fool." "You were hurt. There's a difference." "Is there?" I turned in his embrace, looking up into those dark eyes that had once held nothing but contempt and now overflowed with love. "You called me a stain on your bloodline," I reminded him. "Do you remember?" "I remember every terrible thing I said. They haunt me. Our daughter has your eyes and my skin. Our son has my smile and your determination. Are they stains too?" "They are miracles," he said fiercely. "As is their mother. As is every moment I get to spend with this family I never deserved." "We all deserve love," I said. "Even those who have forgotten how to receive it." He kissed me then, slowly and deeply, with the passion of a man who had learned that the greatest power was not domination, but devotion. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "You saved my life that night," he said. "But you saved more than my body, Bridget. You saved my soul. You showed me that the man I thought I had to be was not the man I was born to be. You gave me permission to become who I always wanted to be." "You did the work," I reminded him. "I just gave you a reason. You gave me everything." I smiled, thinking about the journey we had taken, the obstacles we had overcome, the transformation that had seemed impossible until it wasn't. "Do you remember what you said to me that morning after the shooting?" I asked. "When I was sitting beside your bed?" "I said I didn't deserve you. And I said life isn't about deserving. It's about choosing." I remember. "Well, I've been thinking about that, and I've decided that maybe I was wrong." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I reached up and cupped his face in my hands, looking into the eyes of the man who had become my home. "I think you did deserve me," I said. "Not the you who treated me like nothing, but the you that was waiting underneath all that fear and pain. The you that I could see even when you couldn't see yourself. That man deserved to be loved, and I'm grateful that I got to be the one to show him how. Dax's eyes glistened with emotion, and he pulled me close, holding me like I was the most precious thing in his world. Because to him, I was. And in the end, that is what this story is about. Not the hatred that marked its beginning, but the love that defined its ending. Not the darkness that tried to destroy us, but the light that emerged when two broken people chose to heal together. The Mafia boss who hated his black wife discovered that she was the best thing that ever happened to him. And the woman who was traded like property discovered that her worth was never determined by how others saw her, but by how she saw herself. We were an unlikely love story, Dax and I. But perhaps those are the best kind. The ones that remind us that transformation is always possible, that hatred can become devotion, and that the one night that changes everything is never the end of the story. It is only the beginning. If you watched this far, thank you for being part of this journey. Remember that your own story is still being written, and the chapters ahead may hold surprises more beautiful than you can imagine. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories coming, and I would love for you to be here when they arrive. Until next time, remember, the one who seems to hate you the most might just be the one who needs your love the most. And sometimes, just sometimes, that love can change everything.